Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be tackling an in-swing hidden door. This is a very interesting scenario with hidden doors. Certain situations require you to have a hidden door that will swing in. Typically, it's much easier to do these whenever they swing out into a room. But in the case like this hallway, being able to have a concealed door that swings in is what we wanted. We'll be using Sugatsune hardware for this install. It works fantastic and it's actually not that difficult to execute this. Just to give you some context before we start this video, we've got a curved circular stair wall here and our hidden door is going to be concealed right here. So what is our overall design philosophy? As you can see, we've got a flush slab paint grade door, solid core, 1 3/4 inches thick. You want a very stable door. You also need the door to be 1 3/4 inches thick to work with this Sugatsune E190 pocket door, not pocket door, concealed hardware. You want heavy duty hardware that's gonna not move and over time, so the Sugatsune hardware is great. You'll notice we've got our panel mold applied to the wall. So all the way up here, it can just be installed around the door frame, and then it hides the connection between the door jamb and the drywall. So it's all seamless around here, and the door does not break this forward plane. So everything is going to swing in. It works great. You will notice up here, we've got our magnetic door closer here. So whenever it pulls in, that magnet grabs a hold of it and keeps the door pulled tight to our trim going around here. Now we're not finished up down here at the bottom yet, but it is important to understand there's a big difference between a truly hidden door and a quote unquote concealed door. This is a concealed door. You're still gonna be able to identify the breaks in the molding where it has to be mitered. And potentially if you do this differently, you may see a gap between your door if you carry a space between your panel molding across here. I don't love this design. In this case, the homeowner wanted it to look this way with the baseboard / skirt board detail coming up all the way to the bottom of the panel molding and carrying across here, which will essentially hide this gap under the door. I don't love that, but it is what it is. It'll still look great. It's just not a perfect hidden door. And in this situation, we really can't achieve a perfect hidden door. It's just a concealed door. Now, whenever you're looking at this from down in the first floor hall, you're not gonna be able to tell there's a door here. When you walk up and you see this lower portion, you're gonna be able to tell there's a door here. It's also important to note, I much prefer to design hidden doors in stain grade material because the shadow lines are easier to hide. When you're in paint grade material, basically all of these panel moldings will be caulked to the wall, it'll be painted, and it will be seamless. However, obviously you cannot caulk this joint right here. So it is gonna have a little bit of a black shadow line that's gonna look different from these other panel moldings. It's not that big a deal, but it is gonna look a little bit different, and it's important that you understand that and make your homeowner aware of that this is not gonna be truly invisible. It's gonna be cool, it's gonna look great, but it's not gonna be perfect with this design on a paint grade wall. Now that you can see what we're doing with this door, I'm gonna take you back in time into the shop and show you how to mortise the door and jamb with these Sugatsune E190 hinges for an in-swing door. The first thing we need to do is prep our door. So we're gonna start off by determining whether we want to have a beveled edge on the door or a square edge. In this case, my slab came with bevels on both sides of the door. I did determine that I wanted my hinge side to be square, so I've set up my track saw and I've ripped that bevel off of one side of the door. Something to note that's very important whenever you do hidden doors with this Sugatsune 190 hardware, you want to make sure you get a door slab that's 1 3/4 inches thick. this hardware is not going to work on an 1 3/8 thick door slab. When you're prepping a door slab like this and you're trying to rip either a bevel on the edge or a straight cut on the edge, it's very easy to make a rookie mistake here. This is a full 1 3/4 thick, as I just got done saying. If you try to cut this whole thickness in one pass with your track saw, what's gonna happen is your blade is going to want to deflect. And if you don't have your track secured to the door, it's actually gonna wanna pull the track over as the blade fights against that outside edge. I have this problem a lot with this TS75. So I've learned it's very important that on the track, you use clamps on the underside to secure the track so that it is not going to move. That is the first thing that is very important. The second thing is I sneak through this cut. I don't take it all at once. So we want to set our depth so we're only taking off about a 1/2 inch. Cut it all the way through. Go back, set it another 1/2 inch deeper. Go all the way through. So on and so forth until you get through the door. And then even after I'm at full thickness, I like to actually pass through a couple more times, and oftentimes you'll notice that it's still taking off a little bit of material, and that's because that blade is still wanting to deflect. So I find if you make a handful of passes with your saw, yes, you're gonna get some blade marks on the edge, but you're gonna get a much more true and square cut, and that's what we want. We wanna have a very high level of precision with this edge whenever we're doing a hidden door like this. Let's move on to figuring out our jambs now. At this point, we need to know what width we want for our jambs. We also need to know the length of the jamb legs that we want. I know that my flooring material is gonna be 3/4 inch thick hardwood. I would like the bottom of the door to be about a 1/4 inch above that hardwood. Keep in mind with this hidden door, there will be a piece of baseboard that will mount on the front of the door that will fit a little bit tighter to the floor than I want the actual door to. So I'm fine with the door being about a 1/4 inch off of the finished floor. That gives me an inch right here that I want from the bottom of the door to the bottom of my jamb leg. Yes, the flooring installer will probably undercut these jamb legs when he does his hardwood flooring, but I want to just be able to set this down right on the floor. At the top of the door, I'd like to have an 1/8 inch margin between the top of the door and my top jamb. So if I take my door height of 80 inches, plus an inch here, plus an 1/8, that gives me 81 1/8 inches for my jamb legs. Now we can move on to the head jamb. The way that I like to do my head jamb is to overlap the head jamb over my jamb legs. So whatever width I determine that I want for my opening, I'm gonna add 3/4 and 3/4 for an additional 1.5 inches to this inside dimension. In this case, I'm gonna give myself plenty of room because everything's gonna be covered up by trim so you won't see the gap. I'm gonna add a 1/4 inch to my door width. So I've got door width plus a 1/4 inch plus an 1.5 inches. And in this case, that gives me, what exactly was it again? 33.5. My rough opening is 34. So I should have enough room to fit this inside the rough opening. Now you're probably looking at these jamb legs wondering what on earth is going on here. You'll see I've got an 1/8 inch by 5/8 inch rabbet on the end of this jamb. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna have drywall coming in up to the rough opening, and we're gonna mud and tape over the seam between this jamb and the drywall. And we're gonna mud that all flush so that we've got a perfect transition between the inside of this jamb and the drywall. And then we can apply our base cap trim, which is not very wide, right over the top of that, and it'll conceal the door that way. So that's what we're doing here. We're gonna tape over the top of this, mud it flush, and then it'll be a seamless transition. Also keep in mind, guys, because I am doing this detail where we're mudding the jamb in place, I am adding an additional 1/8 inch to the jamb width to account for that. And then we'll use a nice wide trowel to feather that out all the way around the door. So don't forget to add that extra 1/8 inch if you try to do this detail. I also added about another 1/16. You know, typically with framing and drywall, your jamb width is going to be 6 9/16, but you're going to have some variation. On the inside of the door, we'll just be using casing like normal. And I gave myself a little bit extra on this to just ensure that we're going to be proud of the drywall, and I've got some adjustability to play with there. Now it's time to move on to our hinge layout. First thing we want to do, make sure you've got your door oriented correctly. Make sure you've got the bevel going in the correct direction. Remember, because we're making this a very weird in-swing scenario, everything is opposite. So on a typical door, I would have the bevel going in this way because the door would be closing, swinging out and closing in. But in this case, my door is actually going to be swinging in, and then it's going to be closing into the jamb, so I actually have my bevel going up this way. So if this isn't making sense, you'll see why it is this way as we get this installed. But it's very important to picture everything correctly, very important to label everything correctly. So I've got the bottom of the door labeled, I've got the face, the outside face of my door labeled, the top, I've got the top of my jamb labeled, and I've started my hinge layout. We'll be using Sugatsune templates to mortise this. The first thing you'll notice, this is the outside of my jamb. I've got a pencil line going the length here. That is set at 1 3/4 inches in to match the thickness of the door. Why do I need to have that here? Well, normally we would use a template like this and we would just bump our stop to the outside of the jamb because the door would be hinged towards the outside. In this case, we're hinging it towards the inside, so we're actually going to have to flip this template and use this line as the reference point for our template. So that's why that line's there. I have the location of my hinge, top and bottom, basically matches the longest point on my template here. So that's marked out in each of these locations. I'm going to show you what this screw is for next. Now we need to transfer our lines from our jamb onto our door. So I'm going to just pull this door over the edge of my workbench, and I put a couple screws on here midway where my hinge is located so that I can just hang this template right on the door and it'll hold itself in place, and then I can transfer those lines onto the door. I've got an 1/8 inch gauge block right here. I'm going to go to the top of the door. I'm going to put the gauge block on the top, and I'm going to move my jamb over until the top of my jamb is flush with that 1/8 inch gauge block. That's going to give me an 1/8 inch margin at the top of the door. Now I'm going to find my pencil lines on the jamb, and we'll transfer those same pencil lines onto the door here very carefully. Again, obviously, we're trying to be as precise as possible here. There we go. So those are all transferred, and I can take these screws out now. I've gone ahead and taken my pencil marks and I've squared those down on the edge of the door. We can start mortising with our templates. All right, let's get into a little bit of important knowledge for you to have about these Sugatsune hinges as well as the templates. You would think that Sugatsune could design a hinge so that both sides of the hinge could use the same template. That would be way too simple and easy on the carpenter. We don't want that. So to do your mortising operation for these hinges, you're actually going to need 2 different templates. Now, Denpo Products has designed a single-use template, and you can do this with just 1 template. However, you do have to remove these screws and flip this piece and this piece over, and then move your screws over to a different hole, which will widen the template, whether you're doing your door or your jamb. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but you'll see on this template, it's got laser etched right there. It says door on both sides. Very important that you see that, and then you put the screw in the countersunk hole on the face of each of these pieces. And that means this template is now good to use on your door. Now, I like to use 2 templates, and you'll notice here on this one, it says Jamb. It's laser etched Jamb right there, and then my screw is in the countersunk hole. So this one is gonna be narrower or wider, whichever it is, but very important that you understand that. It's 2 different size templates for the door or the jamb with this system. You will also notice right here, this narrow piece is going to move, and that is going to allow you to do your deeper mortise here on the hinge or your longer, shallower mortise. So again, these templates are set up 2 different ways right now. You'll see on the bottom template, this piece is moved over for my deeper mortise. This piece is moved over for my shallower mortise to the wider length. Hope that all makes sense. Now, normally, when I would go to mortise my door for the hinge, I've got these stops right here, and I would set this up so that the outside of my door was face up. I would put the jig on like so and do my mortise because the hinge direction is out. Now we're doing something weird here. We're doing it in reverse. So I'm actually going to have to flip over my template. This is the outside of the door, but it's going to be swinging in. So I actually need to use the stops from this direction. And essentially, just to help you visualize a little bit better, the jamb will be like this. Normal door, you would have it swinging out. We're not doing that here. We're gonna have it swinging in. With a typical hinge, you could not do that, but with these concealed hinges, we can do that. With these templates, just like a standard scenario, we're gonna be using a 5/8 guide bushing with a 1/2 inch wide router bit. So last time I was doing routing on these very templates, I believe, I experienced some major carnage on my guide bushings. It was a disaster. I was an hour and a half away from the shop, and I learned something very important. Spiral bits are terrible with guide bushings. If you have the cutting blade on the spiral bit to where it can to potentially move and touch your guide bushing, it will make absolute carnage of it. I learned if you can get a mortising bit, 1/2 inch shank, to where the shank, the smooth round shank of the bit is touching your guide bushing, this won't happen. It can't happen. But if you have some beautiful long spiral bit, 1/2 inch wide that you're using with a guide bushing like this, and as you're mortising, you hit something and that bit moves, it's gonna grab a hold of that guide bushing and create a disaster. So keep that in mind. I don't know why I never knew that. Been doing carpentry my whole life and never picked up on it until a few months ago. So another pro tip, always keep extra 5/8 guide bushings and router bases at the shop because this happens all too often, probably shouldn't. But these will also come loose and you can end up with the same scenario going on. So whenever you're putting your collar in, I always use thread locker to make sure that this ring can't come loose because it doesn't matter how hard you tighten it, in my opinion, in my experience, if you don't have thread lock on it, it's gonna come loose. So basically, I set these up to be permanent. This base is now dedicated to this guide bushing, and if this happens in the future, I'm not even gonna take the time to try to fix it. That didn't work. You get the picture. One thing I will tell you, whenever it comes to getting your bit centered on a guide bushing, you can use cones and stuff, but honestly, I find just slightly loosening the screws, and then I position it, spin the bit around until I visually see that it's even, and then I just tighten the screws up really good, and that works just as good for me for these kinds of applications to centering the bit on the bushing. So, and it's fast and easy, so that's what I'm doing there. Setting my depth here, I'm gonna put template down, and then I'll just twist my base down until I'm doing the shallow mortise right now, so I'm just looking to get the top of that bit flush with the top of that. It can also be helpful to take a block across the top here just to verify that you've got it nice and even. I'm actually, if anything, just a hair high right there. I think that's pretty good. Do a final check now. Since we did move the base up and down, just spin your bit around and verify you've got the same margin all the way around the guide bushing and that nothing has moved off center too bad. You can't really see it, but I tried to choose a bit with a cutter length sufficient so that my 1/2 inch shank is actually contacting the guide bushing under here. You can't see it, but that's what we want. And then again, I find that these straight bits work better than the spiral bits in the event that something goes off course. But either way, you want that 1/2 inch shank to be making contact with your guide bushing ideally. Now next, I want to set up another router for my deep mortise. So I'm gonna look at what I need as far as cutter length, about 1 1/8 inches. So I went over to my router bits and I found this bit, it's 1.5 inches cutter length. So that's ideal so that we have the cutter length I need, but the shank of the router bit will be contacting the guide bushing here, which will give us some safety. That is one of the really important reasons why I have tried to stock basically all the different lengths of mortising bits. That way I can select the one I need and have the right cutter length. All right, guys, so I've got my first mortise here done, and thankfully the fit is very good. It is important to note on these Sugatsune hinges, you have one side that is specifically for the door, one side that is specifically for the frame, and it's indicated on the back side. So going ahead and just giving this a little test fit, that looks really good. Now, I almost made a mistake a little bit ago. I realized when I set the depth of my shallow mortise, I forgot to account for these plastic pieces that will clip on to the front of it. So make sure when you set your depth, you put those plastic pieces on. But you can also see here up on the highest point, it's nice and flush. So I'm very happy with my depth on this. I'm happy with the fit. The alignment on the deep mortise and the shallow mortise are both in line, so I've got a continuous line all the way around. That's good. You will notice you have very little meat left on these doors after you're done routing, so you really need to be careful as you're routing this out and not try and take too much material out at once, because it could potentially grab it and take a chunk out of your door. So if possible, whenever you're routing here on this shallow side, try and do a climb cut first so that it's pushing material into the cut, and then finish it off going against it, and you should be nice and safe. You will notice here my pencil lines are exactly a 1/16 of an inch outside of my cut. That's because when I did my layout, I took this inside dimension to do the layout. So all I had to do was align the inside of the template with those pencil lines, push in my nails, and go to town. Let me go ahead and show you this process. So I am liking starting with the deep mortise first. So I'm gonna move these center pieces in for that. And obviously on the last hinge I finished up with the shallow mortise. So if you continue the same process each time, which I would recommend, you're gonna have to do this every time. I find sticking to the same process helps reduce the likelihood of errors versus changing things up. So now we're all set up. I got my hammer here. I'm gonna line up the insides of the template with my pencil line. They should just cover. And then my stops right here are pushing up against the door. So making sure I'm firmly up against the door, sliding this over so that it's centering on my pencil lines very precisely. I'm gonna start just carefully tapping that in. Verifying again, it didn't move. Looks like we're good to go here. Now this is something I've found that works well with this deep mortise, trying to take all that out with a router. It's a lot of meat, a lot of chances for chunks to get in there, the bit to grab it, and things to go wrong. So I like to hog out most of the material with a drill bit. You can use a Forstner bit. I'm using this spade bit, and I like this spade bit because the depth is such that all I have to do is go as deep as this shoulder point right here, and I know that that's sufficient. So it's just kind of easy in that regard. In order to figure out where the center is for my drill bit, I'm just taking a gauge block and I'm marking it in both directions here. So I've got an easily identifiable center line right there. Now I can just take my drill bit, put it on the center line. I want to make sure I'm at least 1/8 of an inch off of this right here. So go over a little bit, and now I can just start hogging this out. And again, I'm going up to that shoulder point right there. Grab my air hose. Next, I like to just get these high ridges with a chisel real quick. Just makes for less chunks flying around once we get our router in there. Real easy, sharp chisel just to break those off. Now, I am using a shallow guide bushing here, which I really shouldn't be, because if you rock your router off of this template at all, it could just cut right into the template. So do as I say, not as I do. Probably should be using a deeper guide bushing, but we'll just put the router in, make sure that we're seated correctly before we turn it on, and then just really carefully try and route this. Again, using a climb cut motion the first time around so that we're not ripping chunks of wood out, and then we'll go back against the grain with the router to finish it up. Okay, deep mortise is done. Now we need to move on to the shallow mortise. I'm going to move these pieces back. You want to be very careful with these screws that you don't strip them. cross thread them or just over tighten them in general. Be a real pain if you made one of your inserts go bad while you're trying to get this done. Okay, simple as that. Ready for our shallow mortise. Again, this is going to be a little bit easier this time. Not taking off quite as much material here. Okay, verify everything looks good before you take your template off. There we go. Oddly, I've got a little bit of meat left right here. I'm not sure what happened with that. I can tell I didn't quite get, oh, I've got some material left in there. There we go. That looks good. So our door's done now. One thing that I'm doing, because I know myself too well, is I'm keeping the two templates far apart because I don't want to switch up the door template with the Jamb template. So at this point, I'm done with the door template. I'm going to take this guy and set it way over here. That way I can't accidentally grab it. And I'm going to move my Jamb template over here. Go ahead and push our door out of the way. Bring our Jamb up here. Probably throw some clamps over here on the end. So now we've got our Jamb here. If we were routing a normal door, we would use our stops right here and we would index those against the edge of the door. Because we're doing this backwards, this has to be flipped around, and our reference point right here is now on this line, which is 1 3/4 in. So from that line, I'm essentially trying to figure out what the measurement is from the edge of the door to the inside of the template right here so that I can make another line. So I think it's about 3 5/16 in this case. So I'm going to make another line there, and I'm going to look here down the side of the template. If I line that up flush with my line let me move this down a little bit for you. If I line this up with this line I just put on there, is the stop now indexing off that 1 3/4 mark? It is. So I'm going to go ahead at this point and just transfer this line all the way down the door. And then we'll have to take our template here and remove these stops. The thing I really should have done before I did that was I should have put a pencil mark so that I can make sure that those go back exactly to where they were. So now we can take our template, double check it, make sure you've got the jamb side of the template face up. We'll go ahead and line the back side of the template up right here. I'm going to shift this down until it's flush with my pencil lines inside my template opening, as well as nice and even on the back side here. Try and very carefully get that into place. You'll notice that I have GRK screws right there. And I'm pretty sure that's because I figured out whenever you're trying to nail this template into white oak or even poplar, it just doesn't work very well. So we're going to use this little GRK screw. Works a lot better than trying to hammer that nail in. Just for the sake of simplicity and error reduction, which is important whenever you're doing work like this, I'm going to keep the same process as I was just doing on the edge of the door. We're going to start with the deep mortise first. You get so much work into a process like this, and I'm already, quite a few hours into this. I don't want to make a mistake and have to go backwards. So I'm going to keep the same order of operations, same process, keep it simple for my simple mind, and make it really hard for me to screw this up. So marking my center pencil line there. Once you get into a rhythm, this really goes pretty fast. We'll go ahead and do the same thing with our spade bit. Nice thing here, we're working flat again, and it's not nearly as strenuous, and I don't have to worry nearly as much about the router lifting up off the template. Going to do the same climb cut pattern and then finish it off going back against the grain. Frame side. This is where you can start to see a little bit of what we're doing different here. This is how this door will function. A typical installation would have the hinge flipped this way and opening like that. We're not doing that. We're going this way. Now, you can see how little meat we had left when we did our door. If we were doing a normal hinge installation with it turned this way, you would actually have the same thing. There would be much less margin right here, and you have to be extremely, extremely careful when you're routing it because it'll easily grab a hold of this fragile section of wood here and just destroy it and mangle it. The other thing is, with this rabbit detail that I have on the jamb, if we were doing an outswing application, this probably wouldn't be working very well because it would be insanely thin. Probably wouldn't work at all. So it is gonna work with what we're doing here, but hopefully this is making a little more sense. All right, guys, time to put some hinges in here. Now, another mystery to me, these Sugatsune hinges, they have three-way adjustment, but they don't come zeroed out. So right out of the box, they're never in alignment. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is loosen these two set screws right here, which will allow this to move up and down, and we want to get these in alignment. So I'm just gonna go ahead and next, we'll drop these in place. We want to locate the side that says frame on the back. Drop that into our frame. Frame. The screws that they provide are decent sized screws, and we are all the way outside here on the edge. So you want to make sure that the hole that you pre-drill is decent sized and not too small or it might split. All right, we made it through this without any catastrophic mistakes. Everything is working as it should. My margins, bottom and top, are good. My margins between the door and the jamb are good, and it's functioning exactly like it's supposed to. So we're in good shape. The battery on my mic is about to die, so I'm gonna sign off. We'll pick up with this on the job site, getting this installed. Unfortunately, it is gonna be a little bit of a drawn out process to get this finished up, because we've gotta have, once I have the door installed, the drywaller will have to come in, mud this, then we'll have to apply our panel molding on the wall, and then baseboard and all that before we can really see how this actually looks all finished up. Okay, so checking in after installation, our hidden door is now installed, so it's time to wait for the drywallers to come back and mud this. So key details, shimmed it really well, shims over the bottom and top of both hinges as well as in between. Want to shim it really good so there's no movement in this board. If we go ahead and pull it closed here, you'll see how that will work. Flushes up here, and then the drywaller will mud and tape this right here, and they'll use the top of this rabbet as a guide, and they'll taper their mud out 18 inches all the way around the door, and then we can apply our panel over that, which will sit over this seam. It'll cover this door margin right here all the way around to the bottom, and you'll only have about 4 or 5 inches of this margin visible through here between the top of the baseboard and this seam in the shadow boxes or the paneling, whatever you like to call it. You'll also notice, very important that this not be cross-legged. Everything's got to be on plane with the wall. So I started up here, getting the top on plane where I wanted, and from there you adjust your legs accordingly to try to split the differences and get it to work the way it's supposed to. So from there, you can see we've got enough space to tape and mud. And again, getting it tapered out 18 inches is gonna be ideal. But I'm really happy with how everything came together here. If we open the door, pushing it in, the other key thing, it's only gonna open 90 degrees with this type of installation. And put my casing and back band detail around the inside. This is just kind of like a mechanical closet, so doesn't really need to look super fancy in here, but it'll look nice on the inside of the door as well whenever it's closed like this. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. It was a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing what it looks like all painted up. Drop a comment below if you've got any questions. We'll see you in the next one.